Our sponsor today is Midas Healthcare Solutions. They are elevating technology to help prevent medication diversion. Key features include real-time visual proof of compliant medication disposal, powered by machine learning and AI to detect drug wasting behaviors. Seamless integration with your ADC, EMR, and diversion software for efficient reconciliation of waste transactions, including identifying outliers. Anytime witness technology, providing flexibility when a witness is required for unused controlled substance disposal, and RX Intercept for customizable random and targeted sample collection with secure chain of custody. Welcome back, listeners. My guest today is Denise Bruscino. She is the Chief Diversion Officer for Moffitt Cancer Center in Florida. Denise is a nurse with a variety of experiences within the inpatient setting, and she also has a background in behavioral analysis. She refers to herself as a unicorn, and we're going to elaborate that in a little bit. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you, Terri. It's really nice to be here. This is my first podcast, and I'm quite excited about it.
Me too. So let's start by having you set the stage for us a bit by giving us an overview of the various areas you have worked in, including your behavioral analysis work.
So I have spent, nursing is my second career. And I've spent over 17, 18 years as a nurse, and I worked all in critical care, various roles. I've done trauma, I've done ICU, and helped out in certain procedural and PACU areas. For 10 years at Moffitt, prior to doing the role that I have now, I was actually the lead rapid response and code team leader. And so I responded to everywhere in our hospital, meaning from outpatient clinics to infusion centers, transfusion, treatment centers, procedural areas, inpatient. And in 10 years, I got to know everyone very well, and I got to know processes very well. And my role was always to respond when situations were happening. I also helped out the ICU doctors, and I worked to stabilize patients, help out in procedures. I kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything in all areas of the hospital. And prior to being a nurse, I was a behavior analyst. And I worked a lot, obviously, assessing behaviors. And I did a lot of contract work doing profiling cases for suspects for various government agencies and police departments.
That is quite a resume. And this dovetails into the unicorn, right? You and I were talking about that, how you in particular, myself as well, have dabbled into a lot of things. And I think that really sets you up very well for this role in diversion investigations, right? Not only, clinically, you've got the clinical piece of it locked down really well. You understand all of the areas within the hospital. Behavioral analysis, which comes into play with interviewing. So let's talk about that a little bit. You are the lead interviewer at your facility. You do a lot of things, but you're also the lead interviewer. Interviewing is really challenging because first it requires clinical knowledge. And do you think it's easier to learn the clinical piece or the behavioral analysis interviewing piece?
They're both challenging in their own ways. I do sometimes tend to lean that interviewing is a little bit harder in this particular scenario because clinical, I can teach you the clinical skills, and clinical is all about knowing the knowledge and applying it. Critical thinking and clinical skills is something I can't teach you, so that is the hard part to learning clinical skills. But in the interviewing process, when you're interviewing in situations like this, it's different than doing necessarily an interview for a job or just something chat. You're interviewing essentially someone that you suspect has done something, and you also they're going to come into it, and there's no way they're going to be like, "Yep, I did it. I did all of this, and this is what I did." So you have to know how to read the room, communicate well with people. You also have to be able to understand yourself very well and your own communication style. And those are things to me that I feel are so much harder to learn or to teach somebody how to interpret behavior and how to truly understand yourself, because not everybody focuses on that either. And I think both of those things need to happen for you to be very smooth and kind of successful at interviewing.
Okay. When you say we need to be able to understand ourselves as the interviewer, what do you mean by that?
So, like for myself, communication, I need to know and understand exactly what my communication style is. How can I react in situations and make sure that I remove any biases of anything before entering into the room, before talking to somebody? Because in order for any effective communication to happen, no matter what the situation is, you do have to be able to know your audience to effectively communicate with them. And we all have different communication styles, and no one is perfect in their communication style, and no one's communication style is perfect for every scenario and every audience. But if you can truly understand how you communicate, it affords you an advantage to be able to flex your style a little bit when you need to. And that is very important in situations like this, because you don't know what the other person's going to do, say, how they're going to respond. It's not scripted. It's, and it's a stressful situation for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. It's clear to me about being able to pivot with the words that they're telling you, right? You take it, they answer a question, it's like, oh, I'm going to go over here because now they've said something that I can play upon, needs more clarification, needs to challenge. But I don't really think of it as me adjusting my style. But you're right. What are the different kinds of styles that you have found yourself adapting based on the person that you're interviewing?
Well, like personally, I'm a very direct communicator. My style for the most part is very direct. I'm forward, which can also be seen as assertive or intimidating. And my audience, the person that I'm speaking to, might not be someone who's receptive to a direct communicator. They might be someone who needs someone who's a little bit softer, a little bit more light. And I have to know that if I'm going to approach someone and I am a direct communicator, a direct style, that's not going to be effective to someone who might get offended easily, because a direct communicated style can easily offend, can easily intimidate. And I'm not going to be effective in that situation. So I need to know how to change and alter how I am presenting whatever information it is that I'm presenting.
Right. So I'm curious, do you usually start with your natural style that's more direct, or do you start softer and see where you need to go from there?
No, I fake it. I go soft.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, that does. Because if you're too direct, you're done at the very beginning, probably.
Exactly. It's too intimidating. So anytime I start out in the beginning, I put on the smiling face. I'm very soft. I'm very light in my tone. I try to, ease the room, lighten up the situation. I try not to make it come across as serious as it is in the beginning, because I think that is just going to off-put anybody. An employee who's walking into a room where they're being pulled away from their unit, they're being brought into a conference room, and, they see HR sitting, they see other people sitting in there. They're already scared. They want to know what's going on. They're already on the offense. They're already on the defense. And so, when anyone's on the defense, if you just start going at them direct, I know for myself, even myself, who is a direct communicator, I would put my wall up and I would start to, push back, right? You get too defensive.
Yeah. How do you introduce yourself? I'm guessing you don't say, I'm Denise, the Chief Diversion Officer. And how do you start that first? Why are they there?
So when we bring them in, first of all, we have a very small team that comes in for the interview process, because we try to make it as, the least amount of intimidation into a room as possible. So we have myself, we will have the manager for that team member who walks them over to the interview. And we have a member from HR. We're the ones inside of the interview. Outside, which is not visible to the team member, we have security. They are out of sight of the team member. Once the door closes to the room, security stands outside of the door in case we need them for anything. And then Occ Health is over in Occ Health, and they're out of sight as well. They're on call for when if we have to do a drug screen. So when we come into the room, I always seat them right next to me because I don't want to sit at the head and I don't want to sit across from them because I feel like that can be intimidating. So I allow them to sit next to me, and on the other side of them, I will have their manager because that's a comfort for them. And then HR sits across from us. And I introduce myself. I don't say my position. I just say, hey, like I'm Denise. I don't do it in any formal way. I say, we just have you in here today. I try to lighten the mood. I'm like, I know you're a bit nervous right now. You don't understand what's going on. I'm like, I want you to know this is, there's nothing bad. There's nothing wrong. We're just trying, my job here is to go over practice and processes in the hospital. And so anytime we have things, I audit people randomly and I bring them in just to talk to them about what they're doing. Maybe I've seen some mistakes. I want to take a look at those things and give you the opportunity to go over all of those things. And we'll have everyone in the room introduce them. Well, we'll have the HR person, introduce themselves into the room just to, and they kind of just give a brief, synopsis of that they're just here for support. And I always start my interview process by asking them, just walk me through a day. How do you give medications? When you're giving medications, what's your process? Walk me through your day. If you have, a heavy caseload or patients that are busy, how do you process everything? What is kind of your steps and how you go through everything in a day? So I tried to get all of that information from them to kind of set the tone before I dropped the ball of, these are some issues we've had.
Right.
And now let's talk about those.
Those specific issues.
And even when I talk about those, I ask them like, hey, on this date, we've got several unaccounted for medications. Were you really busy that day? What was going on that day? I try to be, presented in a way that, hey, like there's a reasonable explanation for all of this. Let's hear the reasonable explanation. I don't want to be accusatory.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you offer training for those that are going to be in the room with you? So obviously the manager is going to be different most of the time. Some of them probably have been in there more than once with an employee, but an HR, I don't know how many HR representatives that you have that would come in there, but do you do any training for them, and do they participate in any way, or are they just literally there in their respective roles, but you're doing all of the talking?
So we actually did a mock training. So I set up a bunch of mock trainings with not the managers. I left them out of it just because I couldn't bring in every single manager, and it's not going to be the same manager every time. But for myself, HR, we did go through, and even with security, I recruited some of my nurse friends and I had them play the role of various different types of suspects. I gave them each a script of what the scenario was, how to act, responses to give, and I did probably a few different kinds of scenarios where some people gave in right away, crying, to, fighting us on every avenue of it. And, so practicing was actually really helpful. And so I explained to HR what their role is. So I actually have a set standard of exactly what is expected for each person in every role. Okay. So throughout the whole intervention process, whether you're the person in the interview or not. So we do tend to have, it's a main HR person who's always there. If she's unavailable, we have a backup person. So both of them, we went through all the mock trainings with both of the HR. We have certain security leads, and they're the ones who went through the mock training with us. And I did have our assistant chief nursing officer, who is the backup for myself. They were also in on the interview, like the mock interviews. And everyone has a role. So for the intervention process, IT has a role, HR has a role, OC Health has a role, security, myself, administration, and the manager. That information is sent out to everyone before we do the intervention. This way they know when it's their time what their role is. For the managers, I send out a scripted email to them. And that email is scripted to say, this is what's happening, this is what the process is, and this is your role. I also always touch base with them and do a quick one-on-one to make sure they don't have any questions and that they understand what their role is. Because the manager's role for us is to just be there to support the team member who's being interviewed, because they are going to be very nervous. And the team members need someone on their side because they're going to feel like myself and HR are against them. So they need someone who's on their side, and that's where the manager comes in. HR is there basically to fill in the gaps. They're there. I do most of all of the talking. HR is there to fill in the gaps. We'll get to a point in the interview where we do talk about, we want to be supportive. We want to help you through any processes. We have connections with IPN, PRN, and EAP programs to help people. So we try to focus on that. We will have HR lead the role on those programs. HR is also there to, at the tail end of the interview process, discuss what any next steps will be. So we all have a role.
Yeah, you have a role. All right. How is there a specific script that you have given the managers to use in order to get the employee to the room? Because it starts there, right? It's like
in the scripted email that I send them, yeah, there's kind of like a little excerpt of like, here's an example of what you can say, what to do to, first of all, not trigger them, but then also get them out of a scenario and not put attention on them by other, team members around them to try. We try to keep it as anonymous as possible. Mm-hmm. Even when we bring people in for the interview process, we try to do it either right before they start their shift or right after their shift. Okay. Sometimes we do have to pull people in the middle of a shift. We try not to do that because that is, one, more nerve-wracking, two, right. Everyone else on the floor tends to be like, well, what happened to so-and-so and where did they go? And they've been gone for hours and now they didn't come back, so.
Right. If you're pulling them at the beginning of a shift, do you also have something scripted for the charge nurse or whoever that now has to fill in their, people are probably like, what happened to Sally? I thought she was going to be here today.
Well, what we will do is if we're pulling before a shift, I work with the manager and we actually set up to have an extra person in the area to cover for them. So that if it's going to leave them short-staffed, we will set that up, and then they will talk. The manager will go to the CL and say, "Oh, like so-and-so had a family situation," or we'll have some sort of reasonable explanation as to why they're not going to see them, and then say we have it covered with this person, or we will put them onto the schedule without the CL knowing that we have removed the other person. Just so that it seems seamless.
Yeah. And do you typically recommend that, because an interview can be kind of traumatic no matter what the outcome is, right? Mm-hmm. So do you typically recommend that they just kind of replace them for the entire day and let them go home, however they're going to get home, depending on what happens, and not work that shift that day? Or do you kind of play that by ear?
Oh, if we pull them before the beginning of their shift, they're not working that day, because no matter what, once we are done with the interview, all of our team members are put on an administrative leave until we can further close the loop on everything. Okay.
All right. So there are no decisions made in that interview until everyone has that discussion, even if in your mind you're thinking, I think this is practice. Or this is pretty clear, something else. they go on leave no matter what.
No matter what, because we still need to get the results of their drug screen.
Okay.
And we still need to, search their property, search their locker, their person, their vehicle. So we need all of that information before we can close the loop. And then when we do the drug screen, it's not immediate. It's a send out for our facility because we're a cancer hospital. We don't specialize in drug screening. So that's always sent out. We need to wait for the results of that. And all of that process, we put them on administrative leave for that.
Okay. So drug screening, property searches, is that all a standard part of every single interview?
Absolutely.
Okay. No matter what you think is actually going on. Okay.
Yeah. Because we found that sometimes, I've very rarely, but every once in a while I've been a little duped. I'm like, oh, maybe it really is kind of a practice thing, but we still have to treat them all the same way. When I came on to this program and started to develop it a year and a half ago, that was my first job, was to standardize as much as possible. So every single process and step that we do the exact same way for every single person. Yeah. This way, there's no questions, there's no bias, there's no room for, well, so-and-so, I was treated this way and so-and-so wasn't. We do everything the same. If we bring someone in for an intervention, the intervention process from the beginning to the end is the exact same, regardless of, even during the interview, we all in the room kind of develop an idea of what we think is going on. If we think it's diversion, rather we think it's practice, we will still do all of the exact same steps because you never know. Right. You really never know.
Yeah, that is true. You do never know. So let's back up a little bit then. What is the criteria? If you do all of these things, I would think that there may be some tendency to not want to bring the person in for the interview unless you're fairly sure, because that's a lot that happens afterwards. Every situation is different, but I could just hear some facilities saying, no, I don't think we're really sure, so we're not going to go to the next step of interview. Is there a particular criteria where you decide they need to come for an interview?
So I set up a scale of like low, moderate to high risk.
Okay.
And as I audit somebody and I pull all the data and I'm looking for trends and I review everything, we have our own little rapid team that we pull together, which is myself, our assistant chief nursing officer, or it will be, say, if it's anesthesia, it will be the chief for anesthesia. It will be the manager over the person, their direct supervisor. We have OC health, infection control, pharmacy, security, and HR. And we come together and I will talk about all of the facts. But usually if we've gotten to a point where we are bringing together that team member, even if collectively all of us in the room feel that this is poor practice, we will still bring that person in for an interview process. And we will go through the whole process because you just don't know. There's been a couple times where we were like, okay, it's bad practice, and surprise, it wasn't. Because diversion and poor practice masks diversion, right? Yeah. And so sometimes it's very hard to decide between the two. So it's just easier to bring everyone in case we miss. So then if at the end we have negative results, meaning we don't find anything in our search, their drug screen is negative, and even through the interview process, we collectively feel by the answers that were given to us, the responses received, the behavior, viewed, we know it's practice. At that point, then we go to HR, and HR will work with that team member's manager and create kind of like an action plan to get the person back on track and get their practice back in order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I find a lot of my frustration is where I've conducted an audit and then either based on my experience, it's like, okay, you need to take this to the next step, or there's just stuff there, but I really don't know. But I mean, you need to ask the questions, right? Like you said, you just don't know sometimes until you have the conversation. but it dies on the vine right there, because the facility, when they get together, and, I'm the outsider, right? I'm the consultant. I'm not the one driving the program. I can only give the recommendations, but I find that they're like, yeah, we decided this is practice. Like, well, how did you decide that? Because you didn't have a conversation with the person. I mean, you're looking at the data just like I'm looking at the data, and you, frankly, probably don't have as much experience as I do looking at the data and seeing cases, right? And you come back with, yeah, we think it's just practice, so we're going to educate. And that's so
that has to be
love
very
the
frustrating.
fact. It's frustrating. And I love the fact that you've got a process set up, like just do it, just have the conversation. And I think probably too, some facilities don't want to create a problem for that person or, accuse that person. But I would guess that the longer you have your process in place, word travels, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just now part of the process. It's, well, you come in and you have a conversation and you have people that have gone back to work and it's not an issue. And we didn't handle you any different than anyone else. And we just had some questions and you answered them for us, and all good.
I agree. It's easier to just treat everybody the same way. And the scenario you're discussing has got to be very frustrating. I'm very fortunate. We have a very positive team. They will actually rely heavily on my thought of it. Sure. But if I'm bringing someone in, even if I really do have that, spidey sense that it's bad practice, I still think that they need to be interviewed. They still need to be taken through all of the exact same steps as anyone else. And you can usually tell by the end of the interview from the person's behavior, their response to everything, how they acted. Because once we're done with everything and once we have, once the team member leaves property, we come back together to discuss, how do we feel this process went? We talk about in the interview, what did you take from it? What did you hear? What bothered you? What didn't bother you? What do you think? And so we have kind of like a debriefing for it. Yeah. We also talk about, do you think we could have done this better? Or could we have done that better? So we also use that as a teaching moment, right? For ourselves, because none of us are perfect in the interview, no matter how many interviews we've all sat through. And so we use that to learn from that instance and learn from each other. And even if you can usually tell, we'll usually collectively, I haven't had a scenario where one of us has thought one thing and the other person thought something different. We usually are on the same page, and we're usually right. Actually, I think every time we're right.
Okay. Yeah. What would you say to the facility that is hesitant and doesn't do drug testing because they're afraid that if it comes up negative, then, what are you going to do with the data, right? You've got the data that indicates maybe one thing, then the drug test is negative, and then there are facilities that feel like, okay, well then, if it's negative, we're not going to do anything about it anyway. I don't know. They just have a hard time with maybe somebody's taking it for somebody else and not themselves, and so it's negative. I guess that would be the only reason why it would come up negative. But what are your thoughts on that, not doing a drug test for that?
I don't like to assume anything. We all know the old adage about assuming things. Yeah. So I don't like to assume. And the way I would approach it to an organization who was against that, maybe that, there's liability involved. A patient could get harmed. And if your team member does have an addiction and does have a problem, we're not helping them. We're just further aiding that problem. And then they could end up in a very bad situation themselves. And it's a liability to the organization. You don't need anything to happen. If that person is diverting and they hurt a patient, there's going to be a lot of subsequent actions that follow that. And you don't know. If you can't say that with 110% confidence that is what is happening, then you have, in my opinion, an obligation to follow through the process and be sure of what is going on. And if the drug screen is negative, then like what we do, there was one person, their drug screen was negative, and I still wasn't convinced it was practice. And we kept watching, and we ended up figuring out by continued monitoring that person was taking and giving to their significant other at home.
Okay.
So you can continue to monitor, but we also put people on, like I said, action plans to practice improvement action plans to help them improve their behavior and be the better nurse or better, anesthesiologist, CRNA, APP that they can be, and support them through that. So I don't ever take a negative drug screen as, well, they didn't do it and we wasted all of our time, or this was a bad thing. No, I don't know what they were doing, if they're diverting or if it's poor practice, until I actually have all of the information. My dad always taught me to not go into battle without all of your ammunition, right? So I always go in with all the data, and I never make my final decision until I truly do have all of the data.
All of the data, yeah. What is the most unusual thing that has happened during an interview?
Oh my goodness, there's been so many, but probably the one that stands out the most, that was the most odd that ever happened to us, was we brought somebody in, and you could tell from the beginning she was already very nervous, very guilty. And after we tried different ways to kind of ease the process. We started into it and asking a couple questions, and she wanted to call her lawyer. She wanted to call her mom. And then at one point she pretended to be calling, I think it was her lawyer in this side. Then she hung up the phone, pretended to hang up the phone. I could see her cell phone. So I could see that she wasn't actually on her phone. She was pretending to talk to somebody, and literally just ran out of our room. Ran out of the room because first of all, when we set up, we always leave the door open to them so that they have an avenue to get right to the door. We don't ever block them in so that they do not feel that they are trapped. She got up and she ran out of the door. And I did kind of follow her a little bit just to see what is happening. Security was on it. They did follow her, not in an aggressive way. They followed her to make sure that she did not do anything, and also what was going on. And they followed her to her car. She ran all the way to her car, got in her car, and drove off.
And was that the last you ever saw of her?
Last we ever heard or saw of her ever.
Wow.
She left all of her she had a bunch of property. She left all of that stuff in the room. The only thing that went with her was her keys and her cell phone.
Wow.
So we had her purse and other things, and we just shipped them to her house.
Oh, okay. And she resigned, I'm assuming.
Well, obviously,
it became a no-show.
Yes, we did send her a letter of termination, and we did have to turn everything over to the Board of Nursing and to IPN. But yeah, she just literally ran away right out of the room, just ran away. And we just all stood there looking at each other well, this has never happened before. We actually had a laugh about it because it was just, who runs away?
Yeah. And they tell you to let them, have access to the door, but it's never happened. It's never happened to me either that any of them have. So that must have been it was probably startling to security as she ran out too, which sounds like they handled it well. I mean, your first instinct might go to tackle them, which, would not be appropriate either. So
our security team is wonderful. We're fortunate at our hospital. Now, I'm sure many places are like this, but all of our security team are ex-law enforcement or ex-military enforcement. They're all very well trained. And the ones that do the interviewing with us, that are part of the interviewing process, they're all trained in behavioral techniques.
Okay.
And he was kind of surprised. He saw her run out of the room, and he saw me kind of get up behind her, and he kind of looked at me, and I just shrugged my shoulders. And he just followed her, and not, I said, not in an aggressive way. He didn't chase her down, but he followed her, and then he radioed to some of other security, in the directions that she was going. So we just kind of kept an eye on her and made sure she got us safe. And our property is on USF's campus, so they did alert USF campus police just to say, this is her car. This is kind of what happened. We don't know if she will do anything, and just to keep a lookout, but we never heard from her again.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And I guess it's a good point that he did see you. He confirmed that no one else, she didn't do anything to anyone in the room. You were all fine and safe. And so, yeah, not a tackle moment, but more of a just, see where she's going moment. Any advice that you would give to those who are in the process of developing their interviewing piece of their program?
I would say, whoever the lead interviewer is, do research and learn about what education style you are. What communication style you are, and learn how to pivot and transition throughout the course, because you never know what someone's response is going to be. We've had people crying, we've had people debating, bargaining, pleading, denying, and you have to watch for all the cues. So I would practice. Honestly, the mock interviews that we did were the best things that we ever did, because some people were part of interview processes prior to that, and they loved the mock interviews. It made things so much more smooth, seamless, and cohesive for all of us involved.
Yeah, I like that. That's great advice. All right. Thank you very much, Denise, for your time. I think the listeners will get a lot out of this interview, and thank you for sharing what your processes are. And I think a lot are going to be a little jealous as to what you've got set up over there, because you've got a nice program over there. Thank you.
We do. Thank you so much, Terri. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. A special thanks to our sponsor, Midas Healthcare Solutions. If you're attending the ASHP Futures meeting next month, be sure to stop by their exhibit number 601 to discover their innovative technology. Midas offers solutions for med-surg areas, procedure sites, at procedure suites, and pharmacies. Visit www.midashs.com to schedule a demo and learn more about their technology.